This is KM Wyland, and you're listening to the 312th episode of the Helping Writers Become Authors podcast. It's no secret the end of summer always sees me throwing a massive pity party. No more sandals, no more long days, no more warm toes. But one of the admittedly good things about the end of summer is that life always seems to calm down a bit. I don't know what it is about summer, but life always seems to run at about 200 miles an hour during the nice weather. So it's kind of nice to breathe a little sigh of relaxation as fall approaches, and I can settle in for the completion of year-end projects, the cleanup of odds and ends that have been pushed to the back burner all year, and the beginning of plans to do it all over in 2016. I hope your fall months are shaping up to have lots of positive returns for the lost sunshine as well. The latest post in the video series on my blog is why weak plot points are like the Bush-Gore vote-counting debacle. It talks about the chief cause of weak plot points and how you can make sure your story nails its crucial structural moments every time. To find the post, visit my site at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And now I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast entitled 6 Tasks You'll Love Yourself for Checking Off Your NaNo Pre-Writing List. When participating in National Novel Writing Month, or NaNoWriMo, what is the only thing more important than getting those 50,000 words written in November? How about making sure you've checked all the necessary to-dos off your NaNo pre-writing list in October? Today I'm going to show you how to conquer 6 pre-writing tasks that can help you have a fun, easy, and successful novel writing adventure, whether you're writing that novel during NaNoWriMo or any other time of the year. So, first of all, why should you create a pre-writing list for NaNo? What are the 2 primary goals of NaNo? Number 1, write 50,000 words in 30 days. Number 2, having those 50,000 words be decent enough that they don't require twice that much time to edit after NaNo has ended. That's where pre-writing, aka outlining your novel, becomes a crucial player in your game plan. Creating a pre-writing list for your book will help you plan your story, identify and fix potential problems, and create a smooth drafting process in which you can focus on the flow of your delicious words rather than the knots in your plot. Outlining is my secret weapon. It allows me to harness the full power of my wild creative side and my logical structured side. For the last several years, I've been thrilled to hear from probably hundreds of writers who have used my books Outlining Your Novel and the Outlining Your Novel workbook to prepare for and win NaNoWriMo. So even though I'm not a nanoer myself, this year I decided to put together a special outlining post for all of you who are participating in this great event next month. And of course, everything I'm sharing here is just as applicable if you're writing a story outside the confines of NaNoWriMo. By the time you've finished this podcast, you'll be able to check off the 6 most important preparation steps for not just writing a book, but writing an amazing book and having a great time doing it, too. Pre-writing task number 1. Write your premise sentence. Start your outline by making sure you have a complete premise. Start by asking the following questions. Who is the protagonist? What is the situation in which he finds himself in the beginning of the book? What is his objective? Who is the opponent? What will be the disaster that ends his normal world and forces him into the adventure world of the second act? And what's the conflict? Then, use all those answers to create a premise sentence, following a pattern something like this one from Star Wars: A New Hope. Restless farm boy, that's the situation. Luke Skywalker, the protagonist, wants nothing more than to leave home and become a starfighter pilot so he can live up to his mysterious father. That's the objective. But when his aunt and uncle are murdered, that's the disaster. After purchasing renegade droids, Luke must free the droid's beautiful owner and discover a way to stop, that's the conflict, the evil Empire, the opponent, and its apocalyptic Death Star. Pre-writing task number 2. identify potential plot holes. Writers sometimes get hung up on the idea that outlines are nothing but a dry list of things that have to happen in the story. If you're starting with the list, then you're missing out on the most powerful and important part of the pre-writing process, brainstorming. In outlining your novel, I refer to this part of the process as general sketches. This is where you're actively figuring out your story and identifying all the potential holes. So start by writing down everything you already know about your story. Then take a highlighter and mark everything that raises a question or requires more fleshing out. And then turn those highlights into questions. Instead of saying, the princess is stuck in the high tower, ask, how can I get the princess out of the high tower? So answer your questions, and then go back and highlight any new questions that arise. And then it's time to ask a few more explicit questions. The what if question. Write at least a full page of what if questions. What if this happened or that happened? What if the protagonist was kidnapped by aliens? What if she kidnapped an alien? What if her boss died mysteriously and she was blamed for the murder? What if the boss pretended to die and blamed her on purpose and told her about it? Then we have the what is expected question. Write a list of everything readers will expect from a story of this type. They'll expect the romantic leads to fall in love. They'll expect the bad guy to die. They'll expect the alien to escape. They'll expect the boss to be punished. And then we have the what's unexpected question. Turn those previous questions on their heads. Start looking for unique possibilities and plot twists. By the time you've finished exploring your story's potential and answering all the questions you've raised, you'll have an excellent idea of your story's shape and direction. You're no longer headed into November blind. Pre-writing task number 3. Do your homework on your characters in 3 parts. Part number 1, character backstory. Plot and character work hand in hand. You can't fully understand where your plot needs to go until you understand the characters who will be driving it. Start your exploration of character by investigating your protagonist's backstory. Remember, however, that a character's backstory only matters insofar as it affects the main conflict. Ask the following questions. What events in the character's past caused the inciting event? What shaped the character to make him respond to the inciting event as he does? What unresolved issues from his past can further complicate the spiral of events that result from the inciting event? Part 2, character interview. Now that you know a little about how your character's past will intersect meaningfully with the present of your story, you're ready to explore this person in depth. And for this, I recommend a character interview, which is a list of specific questions designed to help you understand your character inside out. You can grab the 100 plus list of questions that I use in my free ebook, Crafting Unforgettable Characters, which you can get for signing up for my mailing list on my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. Part 3, character arc. Now you're finally ready to unite your plot and your characters. Your protagonist's character arc is where plot, character, and theme all intersect to create a seamless whole. And you'll want to start by figuring out which type of arc your character will be following. A positive change arc, in which the character evolves into a better or more whole person over the course of the story. A flat arc, in which the character already possesses the story's fundamental truth. He begins and ends in basically the same place, but he uses that truth to change the characters and the world around him. A negative change arc, in which the character devolves into a worse or less healthy person over the course of the story. And the negative change arc can come in 3 different varieties. A disillusionment arc, in which the character's eyes are opened to a tragic truth. A fall arc, in which the character begins in a bad place only to devolve into an even worse place by the end of the story. Or a corruption arc, in which the character begins in a healthy place only to be corrupted by a lie and end in a much worse place. The important questions to ask in discovering your character's arc and your story's theme always begin with, what is the lie your character believes? What is the story's contrasting truth? What is the thing your character wants, his outer desire, his physical story goal? And what is the thing your character needs, which will be the manifestation of the story's truth? How is the lie driving his want and getting in the way of his truth and his need? And what is your character's ghost, the wound in his backstory that is driving his lie? And don't forget, you can learn how to structure your character's arc beat by beat in my complete character arc series, which you can find in the left-hand column on my website. Pre-writing task number 4, create a settings folder. Don't overlook your story's settings. Settings should never be an arbitrary choice, since it has the power to affect your story's tone, action, theme, continuity, and cohesion. Identifying and researching as many of your settings as possible before you start writing your book will streamline your drafting process and eliminate the distractions of internet browsing. So before November arrives, take the opportunity to create a settings dossier for your book. List your settings, collect photos, and bookmark websites for research so you don't have to waste time surfing. If you'll be writing fantasy or science fiction, which requires you to create worlds instead of researching them, do as much of your world building now as possible. Be sure to check out Patricia C. Reed's amazingly comprehensive fantasy world building questions, which you can find by Googling. Pre-writing task number 5, find your story's plot points. By this point, you will have a solid understanding of your story's plot, your protagonist's arc, and your story's theme. So now it's time to plan your story's structure by identifying and creating its major plot points. In the first act, we have the hook, which takes place at the very beginning, the 1% mark. Star Wars: A New Hope opens with Darth Vader's capturing rebellion leader Princess Leia's starship in pursuit of the stolen Death Star plans. Before being captured, Leia installs the plans in the droid R2-D2, and R2 and his counterpart C-3PO escape to the desert planet Tatooine. The inciting event takes place halfway through the first act at the 12% mark. The protagonist, Luke Skywalker, encounters the conflict for the first time when his moisture farmer uncle purchases R2 and 3PO, and Luke accidentally sees Leia's message pleading, "Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope." He initially rejects the call to adventure by insisting he can't get involved. The first act ends with a definitive event, the first plot point at the 25% mark, which forces the protagonist to react. Luke's aunt and uncle are murdered by Imperial stormtroopers, which leads him to the decision to go with Obi-Wan to Alderaan. In the second act, we have the first pinch point, which takes place at the 37% mark. This is where Luke feels the pinch of the antagonistic force's power when the stormtroopers chase the Millennium Falcon out of Mos Eisley. In the middle of the second act, at the 50% mark, we have the second plot point, or midpoint. Another definitive event occurs when the Death Star captures the Millennium Falcon, forcing Luke out of his first half period of reactions and into action. Then we have the second pinch point at the 62% mark. The plot turns again when Luke, Han, and Chewie learn of Princess Leia's presence on board the Death Star and decide to rescue her, only to end up with their lives threatened and the stakes raised again when they're trapped in a trash compactor. The third act begins with the third plot point at the 75% mark. As he approaches the final quarter of the story, Luke's actions seem to lead him to a place of defeat when Obi-Wan dies and the Empire places a tracking beacon aboard the escaping Falcon. The climax begins at the 88% mark, halfway through the third act. The conflict between protagonist and antagonistic force reaches a deciding moment as Luke joins the Rebel Alliance's X-Wing pilots and blows up the Death Star in the climactic moment. And finally, in the very last couple of scenes, we have the resolution, in which the loose ends are tied up, the characters react to the events of the climax, and Princess Leia passes out the medals. And don't forget, you can find structural examples of all the major structural moments in dozens of popular books and movies in my story structure database, which is linked in the top menu of the site, or the pull-out menu on the left if you're on a mobile device. Pre-writing task number 6, outline your scenes. So now you're ready to figure out your story scene by scene. Focus on proper scene structure to make certain you're creating a watertight progression from scene to scene. Scenes can be broken down into 2 halves, which can be broken down into 3 more pieces each. We have scene, which is the action half, which is broken down into goal. For example, Luke goes looking for R2, who was on a mission to give Princess Leia's message to Obi-Wan. He encounters conflict. He is attacked by the savage sand people. And then the scene reaches an outcome, usually something that's at least semi-disastrous. In this instance, Luke is knocked out and kidnapped by the sand people, but is rescued by Obi-Wan, who arrives and scares off the sand people. Then we have the second half, the reaction half, which is called the sequel. This begins with reaction, in which Luke wakes up and is stunned to recognize Ben Kenobi as his rescuer. This is followed then by a dilemma. They are still in danger, since the Sand People are sure to return in larger numbers. And they have to make a decision. They'll grab the droids and head over to Obi-Wan's house. And then the cycle just keeps repeating all the way through your book. Once you've answered these vital questions about your book and checked all these tasks off your NaNo pre-writing list, you'll be ready to crank out 50,000 words of solid, achievable story. Don't head into November without a battle plan. Arm yourself with knowledge about your story and where it needs to go. Do that, and you're already more than halfway to NaNoWriMo victory. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.